Emma clutched her worn leather suitcase tighter as the taxi pulled away, leaving her standing before the most magnificent mansion she had ever seen. The job advertisement had been simple: live-in housekeeper for a wealthy family, good pay, room, and board included. What it hadn't mentioned was that she'd be working in what looked like a palace straight out of a fairy tale. Iron gates stretched 12 feet high, adorned with intricate scrollwork that probably cost more than her entire yearly salary at her previous job, serving tables at the local diner back in small-town Ohio. Beyond them, manicured gardens rolled out like green carpets, dotted with marble fountains that sparkled in the afternoon sunlight, and perfectly pruned topiaries shaped like swans, spirals, and geometric patterns that seemed to dance in the gentle breeze. The mansion itself rose 3 stories, its limestone facade gleaming like polished ivory in the golden hour light, with dozens of windows that seemed to watch her every move like curious eyes. Gargoyles perched on corners, their stone faces both intimidating and oddly welcoming, while climbing ivy created natural tapestries across portions of the walls. But here's what's absolutely mind-blowing about what happens next. And I guarantee you won't see this coming, because it changes everything about how you'll view this entire story. As Emma approached the servant's entrance, struggling with her heavy suitcase that contained everything she owned in the world, she noticed a man kneeling by the rose bushes, near an ornate greenhouse that looked like it belonged in a botanical garden. His hands were covered in rich, dark soil. His worn jeans had grass stains on the knees, and small tears that spoke of honest work. And his simple white t-shirt was damp with sweat from hours of labor under the sun. A wide-brimmed straw hat shadowed his face as he carefully tended to the delicate pink blooms, his movements precise and gentle, like someone who truly understood the delicate art of nurturing living things. This had to be the gardener, she thought with relief. At least there would be one normal person in this intimidating place, someone who worked with their hands and understood what it was like to earn an honest living. "Excuse me," Emma called out, setting down her suitcase with a grateful sigh that echoed her exhaustion from the long journey. "I'm looking for Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper. I'm the new girl starting today." The man looked up from his work, and Emma felt her breath catch in her throat, like she'd been struck by lightning. Even shadowed by his weathered hat, she could see the most striking green eyes she'd ever encountered. Eyes that seemed to hold secrets and stories, and a depth that made her want to keep looking. His smile was both warm and mysteriously amused, like he knew something wonderful that he wasn't quite ready to share. He stood gracefully, with the fluid movement of someone comfortable in their own skin, brushing dirt from his hands on a small towel tucked into his leather belt. "You must be Emma," he said, his voice carrying an educated accent that seemed oddly refined for a gardener, with undertones that spoke of good schools and sophisticated upbringing. "Mrs. Henderson is inside preparing your room. I'm Daniel." He extended a clean hand, and when Emma shook it, she noticed his skin was softer than she'd expected, with calluses only on his fingertips that spoke of guitar playing or careful work rather than hard labor. His grip was firm but gentle, and she felt an unexpected spark of electricity at the contact. "Welcome to Ashworth Manor." Now, what Emma doesn't realize in this moment is that she's just shaken hands with the most eligible bachelor on the East Coast, a man whose photo graces the covers of Forbes and Fortune magazines. But we'll get to that shocking revelation in just a moment, because what happens next is going to completely blow your mind. "Thank you," Emma replied, feeling oddly flustered by his intense gaze and the way he seemed to really see her, not just look at her. The gardens are absolutely beautiful. You do incredible work." She gestured around at the paradise surrounding them, taking in roses that seemed to glow with health, hedges trimmed to mathematical precision, and flower beds that looked like living paintings. Daniel's smile widened, and something flickered in those mysterious green eyes that she couldn't quite interpret, a mix of pleasure and something that almost looked like longing. "I spend a lot of time out here," he said simply, his voice carrying a note of contentment that made Emma think he truly loved his work. "It's peaceful, helps me think through problems and find solutions that aren't always obvious indoors." He gestured toward the mansion's side entrance with a hand that moved like he was conducting invisible music. "Let me help you with that suitcase. Mrs. Henderson doesn't like to be kept waiting, and she has very strong opinions about punctuality." As they walked together along a path lined with lavender that released its fragrance with every step, Emma couldn't help stealing glances at this mysterious gardener. There was something about the way he carried himself, a confidence and natural authority that seemed at odds with his humble appearance and station. Mrs. Henderson turned out to be exactly what Emma had expected from every Victorian novel she'd ever read, a stern woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun that didn't allow for a single strand to escape, and sharp blue eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail about a person within seconds of meeting them. She wore a crisp black dress with a white collar that looked like it had been pressed within the last hour, and her posture was so perfect, it made Emma unconsciously straighten her own shoulders. She looked Emma up and down with obvious disapproval, taking in her discount store clothing and second-hand shoes with the kind of assessment that made Emma feel like she was being evaluated for auction. "You're late," she said crisply, though Emma was actually 5 minutes early, according to the antique clock ticking loudly in the hallway. "Mr. Ashworth expects punctuality from his staff at all times. This household runs on precision, and there is no room for casual attitudes or sloppy timing." Her accent was crisp and authoritative, the kind that made people automatically want to apologize, even when they'd done nothing wrong. "Sorry," Emma mumbled, though she wasn't sure what she was apologizing for, and felt a familiar flutter of anxiety in her stomach. Behind Mrs. Henderson, Daniel caught Emma's eye and gave her an almost imperceptible wink that made her stomach flutter for entirely different reasons, and helped calm her nerves in a way that surprised her. "Daniel, don't you have work to do?" Mrs. Henderson's tone was sharp as a knife as she noticed the exchange, her disapproval radiating like heat from a furnace. "The roses won't tend themselves, and I believe you mentioned wanting to check the irrigation systems before evening." Daniel nodded respectfully, but Emma noticed he didn't seem intimidated by the older woman's authority, the way she was, standing his ground with quiet confidence. "Of course, Mrs. Henderson. I was just being helpful to our new staff member." He turned to Emma with that enigmatic smile that made her heart skip beats. "I'm sure I'll see you around, Emma. The gardens are always open if you need a quiet place to think or escape from the intensity of indoor duties." With that cryptic comment, he headed back outside, leaving Emma wondering why a simple gardener had such a profound effect on her composure, and why his words seemed to carry layers of meaning. And here's where things get absolutely insane, because what Emma discovers about this place is going to change everything she thought she knew about her new life, and challenge every assumption she's made about wealth, power, and what it means to find genuine connection in a world built on pretense. Mrs. Henderson led her through corridors lined with priceless artwork that Emma recognized from art history textbooks, past rooms filled with antique furniture that belonged in museums and Persian rugs, that probably cost more than most people's houses. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings, painted with scenes that rivaled the Sistine Chapel, and every surface seemed to gleam with the kind of perfection that required constant, meticulous care. Emma's quarters were on the 3rd floor, reached by a servant's staircase that was itself more elegant than any home she'd ever lived in. And her room was a cozy space, with a window overlooking the gardens, where she could see Daniel still working among the roses, his movements graceful and sure in the fading light. "Your duties begin at 6 a.m. sharp," Mrs. Henderson explained with military precision, standing ramrod straight in the doorway. "You'll help with breakfast service, general cleaning of the main reception areas, laundry for the guest quarters, and special events when Mr. Ashworth entertains. He hosts charity galas, business dinners, and social gatherings frequently, and he expects absolute perfection in every detail, from the placement of silverware to the temperature of serving dishes." She paused dramatically at the door, her hand on the crystal doorknob. "And Miss Walsh, a word of advice that will serve you well if you wish to keep this position. The staff here maintain professional boundaries at all times. We don't fraternize with each other, and we certainly don't bother Mr. Ashworth with personal matters or casual conversation. He values his privacy above all else and has no interest in the personal lives or opinions of his employees." That evening, Emma unpacked her few belongings into furniture that was nicer than anything she'd ever owned, hanging her modest wardrobe in a closet that seemed enormous compared to the cramped spaces she was used to. Through her window, she watched Daniel working late into the evening, his movements graceful and sure as he adjusted irrigation lines by lamplight that cast dramatic shadows across the garden. Who worked in gardens until after dark with such dedication and attention to detail? There was something almost obsessive about his commitment, something that spoke of passion rather than mere employment. She found herself wondering about his story. What had brought him to this place? And why someone with his obvious intelligence and refined manner was content to work with his hands in the soil. The next morning, Emma's cheap alarm clock failed to go off, probably a victim of the long journey and rough handling, and she rushed downstairs 15 minutes late with her heart pounding with anxiety and her hair still slightly messy from sleep. In the massive kitchen that could have served a restaurant, she found barely controlled chaos that made her previous restaurant jobs look simple by comparison. Mrs. Henderson was barking orders at 2 other housekeepers while frantically preparing what looked like a breakfast fit for European royalty. Silver serving dishes gleamed under crystal chandeliers that threw rainbow prisms across marble countertops, and the aroma of fresh pastries, exotic coffee, and what smelled like French cuisine filled the air with a richness that made Emma's mouth water, despite her nervousness. "You're late again," Mrs. Henderson snapped, without looking up from arranging flowers in a crystal vase, her movements sharp with irritation. "Take the breakfast service to the morning room immediately, and for heaven's sake, don't drop anything or touch the serving pieces with your bare hands. Everything on that cart is worth more than you make in 6 months, and Mr. Ashworth notices every detail." Emma carefully maneuvered the elaborate serving cart that seemed to weigh as much as a small car through corridors she was still learning to navigate, her hands trembling slightly with nerves as she tried to avoid bumping into priceless sculptures and delicate side tables that lined the hallways like an obstacle course designed to test her coordination and nerve. But what happens when she enters that morning room is going to absolutely blow your mind, and I promise you'll never see this twist coming, because it reveals something about identity, class, and the masks we all wear that will change how you view every interaction from this point forward. Emma pushed through the ornate double doors, carved with scenes of hunting and pastoral life, and froze like she'd been turned to stone. Seated at the head of a mahogany table that could have seated 20 people comfortably was Daniel. But this wasn't the casual gardener she'd met yesterday, covered in soil and sweat. His hair was perfectly styled in a way that spoke of expensive barbers and daily attention. He wore an impeccably tailored navy suit that probably cost more than her car was worth, with a silk tie that caught the morning light like liquid silver, and he was reading the Wall Street Journal while sipping coffee from fine china that looked like it had been crafted by master artisans. Gold cufflinks caught the light as he turned pages, and a watch that she was pretty sure was a Rolex gleamed on his wrist. Emma stood there, gaping like a fish out of water, the serving cart forgotten, as her mind struggled to process the transformation before her eyes. This couldn't be the same man who had knelt in the dirt yesterday, who had spoken to her with such warmth and genuine interest, who had carried her suitcase with calloused hands and a humble demeanor. Daniel looked up from his newspaper and smiled that same mysterious smile she remembered from the garden, but now she could see it differently, could recognize the confidence and authority that came with unlimited power and resources. "Good morning, Emma. Right on time," he said, his voice carrying the same warmth she remembered. But now she could hear the underlying authority and education, the accent of someone who had attended the finest schools and moved in the highest circles of society. "I hope you slept well in your new quarters." Emma stammered, her mind struggling like a computer trying to process impossible data. "You're not the gardener." The words came out as barely more than a whisper, and she felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. Daniel set down his newspaper with precise movements and stood, revealing the full impact of his transformation from humble gardener to obvious aristocrat. He moved with the same confident grace she'd noticed before, but now she could see it for what it was. The natural authority of someone born to command, someone who had never questioned their place at the top of the social hierarchy. "Actually, I am the gardener," he said, with that amused smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'm also Daniel Ashworth. I own this house, the gardens, and quite a bit more." He gestured elegantly to the elaborate breakfast, spread with a hand that now looked perfectly manicured. "Thank you for bringing breakfast. Mrs. Henderson has outdone herself as usual." Emma felt the blood drain from her face as the implications hit her like a physical blow. She'd been casual, even slightly flirtatious, with a billionaire whose name she now realized she'd seen in magazines and newspapers. She'd complained about Mrs. Henderson's strictness, made jokes about the mansion's overwhelming grandeur, and treated him like an equal when he was so far above her social station that they might as well have been different species. "Mr. Ashworth, I'm so sorry," she began, her voice shaking with mortification. "I had no idea who you were. I never would have what?" Daniel interrupted gently, moving closer with steps that seemed to glide across the Persian carpet. "Treated me like a human being instead of a bank account. Had a normal conversation with someone without calculating what you could get out of it." His green eyes were kind, but amused, and she could see now that the amusement came from a lifetime of watching people's behavior change the moment they learned his identity. "Emma, you've been more genuine with me in one day than most people manage to be in years of acquaintance. Now here's what makes this situation absolutely incredible. And you need to hear this, because it changes everything about how you'll view what happens next, and reveals something profound about loneliness, authenticity, and the price of extreme wealth." "But why didn't you tell me?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as she struggled to understand the game being played around her. She felt mortified, confused, and strangely betrayed by the deception, even though she couldn't articulate exactly why. Why pretend to be just a gardener when when I'm what? Daniel asked softly, and for the first time since she'd entered the room, his confident facade seemed to crack slightly. When I'm Daniel Ashworth, heir to a fortune built over 4 generations, CEO of Ashworth Industries, one of the most eligible bachelors on the East Coast according to Society magazines. His voice carried a note of bitterness that surprised her. When I'm someone who can't go to a coffee shop without being photographed, who can't have a conversation without someone wanting something, who hasn't had a genuine friendship since college because everyone sees dollar signs instead of a person, Daniel's expression grew more serious as he moved to the windows overlooking his beloved gardens. Because that's exactly what I am, Emma. Yes, I own Ashworth Industries and everything. That comes with it. Yes, I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But gardening is my passion, the only place where I can be myself without people wanting something from me. He gestured toward the windows with obvious love and longing. Out there, with my hands in the soil, nurturing something beautiful and alive. I'm not a billionaire bachelor that every socialite wants to marry for my money, or every business competitor wants to destroy for my success. I'm just someone who loves making beautiful things, grow and finding peace in the simple act of creation. Emma stared at him, trying to reconcile the dirt-stained man she'd met with the impeccably dressed billionaire standing before her, and slowly beginning to understand the complexity of his situation. Mrs. Henderson said you value your privacy above all else. I do, Daniel confirmed, his voice carrying years of weariness and disappointment, which is why what happened yesterday was so refreshing, so incredibly rare in my experience. You talked to me like I was just Daniel, not Daniel Ashworth of Ashworth Industries, heir to billions, most eligible bachelor, or any of the other labels that follow me everywhere I go. He moved closer, and Emma caught a hint of expensive cologne mixed with something that reminded her of fresh earth and growing things, a combination that somehow perfectly captured the duality of his existence. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How long it's been since someone looked me in the eye and saw a person instead of a prize to be won, or a target to be manipulated. And what Emma says next is going to determine the entire course of their relationship, because this is the moment where everything changes, and where we discover what happens when 2 people from completely different worlds find something real, despite the impossible circumstances. I don't understand, Emma said, shaking her head in confusion, as she tried to process the implications of everything he was telling her. You want me to pretend I don't know who you are. You want me to ignore the fact that you're literally one of the most powerful men in the country. I want you to continue being yourself, Daniel replied softly, and there was something almost vulnerable in his request. A loneliness so profound that Emma could feel it radiating from him like heat. The woman who thanked a gardener for his beautiful work, who wasn't afraid to look me in the eye and have a real conversation about dreams and hopes and fears. The woman who saw someone kneeling in the dirt and treated him with respect and kindness, simply because he was another human being doing honest work. His eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Can you do that? Can you see past the money and the power and the complications and just see me? There was something almost heartbreaking in his request. A loneliness that Emma recognized because she'd felt it herself in different ways. The loneliness of being judged by circumstances beyond your control, of having people make assumptions about who you are before they even know your name. I think so, Emma said slowly, her heart racing as she began to understand what he was asking. But Mrs. Henderson, the other staff, don't need to know about our conversations, Daniel finished, reading her concerns with the intuition of someone who had become expert at navigating complex social situations. As far as the household is concerned, you're doing your job perfectly, and I'm the eccentric billionaire who spends too much time in his gardens. But Emma, when I'm out there with the roses and the soil, I'm just Daniel, and I'd very much like to continue getting to know the real Emma, not the version of yourself you think a billionaire wants to see or expects from his employees. What happens over the next few weeks is going to absolutely astound you, because Emma discovers that having a secret friendship with a billionaire is more complicated, more beautiful, and more dangerous than she ever imagined possible. During the day, she performed her duties under Mrs. Henderson's increasingly watchful eye, learning the intricate routines of maintaining a mansion that housed priceless art, antique furniture, and more luxury than existed in entire small towns. She mastered the art of serving formal dinners where a single place setting cost more than most people's monthly rent, learned to clean crystal chandeliers that required ladders and specialized techniques, and became expert at maintaining guest rooms that were more luxurious than five-star hotels. But in the early evenings, when her official duties ended and the mansion settled into its quieter rhythms, she found herself drawn to the gardens like a moth to flame, where Daniel worked with his hands in the soil, looking more content and at peace than any billionaire had a right to be. Their conversations began simply, focused on his passion for heirloom roses and her growing appreciation for the intricate art of gardening. But gradually, they deepened into something more profound and personal. Daniel shared stories of business pressures that would crush most people, the weight of employing thousands of people whose livelihoods depended on his decisions, and the isolation that came with never being able to trust whether someone's interest was genuine or financial. Emma found herself opening up about dreams she'd barely admitted to herself. Her secret desire to open her own flower shop someday. Her love of creating beautiful arrangements that brought joy to people's special moments. And her fear that she'd never have the courage or resources to pursue something so impractical and risky. "Tell me about your flower shop dream," Daniel said one evening as they sat on a stone bench, surrounded by his prized roses, the air filled with their intoxicating fragrance. The setting sun painted everything in golden light, and Emma felt like she was living in a fairy tale that couldn't possibly be real. Emma hesitated, unused to talking about her dreams with someone who had the power to make them reality with a simple phone call. "It's silly, really. I used to help my neighbor with her garden when I was little, and I loved creating bouquets for her kitchen table. There's something magical about combining different flowers and colors to create something that makes people smile." She looked down at her hands, embarrassed by the simplicity of her dreams compared to his world of international business and billion-dollar decisions. "It's not silly at all," Daniel said with surprising intensity. "Creating beauty, bringing joy to people's lives. That's more meaningful than most of what I do in boardrooms. What would your shop look like?" And so, Emma found herself describing her vision in detail. A cozy space with wide windows that let in natural light, wooden shelves, displaying seasonal arrangements, the scent of fresh flowers greeting customers like a gentle embrace. She talked about specializing in locally grown flowers, supporting small farms, and creating arrangements that told stories and captured emotions rather than simply following trends. Daniel listened with the kind of focused attention she'd never experienced before, asking thoughtful questions that showed he understood not just her business concept, but the deeper passion driving it. "Money doesn't buy happiness," Daniel said one evening as they sat surrounded by roses that seemed to glow in the twilight. "It buys comfort, security, opportunities, the power to solve certain kinds of problems. But happiness, real satisfaction, that has to come from something authentic, something that connects you to who you really are." He looked at Emma with an intensity that made her heart skip and race. "These past weeks, talking with you, learning about your dreams, and sharing mine have been the happiest I've been in years, maybe ever." But here's where Emma's world gets turned completely upside down, because what she discovers next threatens to destroy everything they've built together and reveals a truth about manipulation, good intentions, and the fine line between helping someone and controlling their life. Emma began to notice things that didn't add up, small details that nagged at her like persistent thorns. Why did Mrs. Henderson sometimes look at her with what seemed like knowing disapproval, mixed with something that almost looked like pity? Why did the other staff members whisper when she passed, their conversations stopping abruptly when they noticed her presence? And why did Daniel always seem to know exactly when she'd be free to meet him in the gardens, appearing at precisely the right moments as if he had access to her schedule? The questions multiplied like weeds in her mind. How had she gotten this job so easily when she'd been desperate and underqualified? Why had her mother's medical bills suddenly become manageable just as Emma had started working at the mansion? And why did Daniel sometimes let slip knowledge about her background that she was certain she'd never shared, then cover it smoothly as if nothing had happened? The truth came crashing down on a Tuesday evening when Emma overheard Mrs. Henderson on the phone in her office, speaking in the low, confidential tones reserved for discussing sensitive household matters. Emma had been looking for cleaning supplies and hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but Mrs. Henderson's words stopped her cold and changed everything she thought she knew about her life. "Yes, Mr. Ashworth. She's exactly as you described her in your initial briefing," Mrs. Henderson was saying, her voice carrying the efficient tone of someone reporting on a successful project. "Innocent, hardworking, genuinely kind, and completely unaware of your arrangement. The payments for her mother's medical bills have been handled as you requested, routed through the charitable foundation, so there's no direct connection to you. The job placement was seamless, and she'll never suspect you've been orchestrating everything from the beginning." Emma felt the world tilt beneath her feet like she was standing on a ship in a storm. Her knees went weak, and she had to grip the door frame to keep from falling as the implications hit her with devastating clarity. The job that had seemed too good to be true actually was. Daniel hadn't been drawn to her naturally through chance encounters in his garden. He'd been orchestrating everything from the very beginning, like a puppet master pulling strings. The coincidental timing of finding her in the gardens, the perfect schedule that allowed them private time together, even her mother's, mysteriously, improved medical coverage. It was all part of some elaborate game whose rules she didn't understand and whose purpose terrified her. "She's developing feelings for you exactly as projected," Mrs. Henderson continued, and Emma's heart shattered into pieces that felt sharp enough to cut. The psychological profile was accurate. Her background of financial struggle and family loyalty made her the perfect candidate for this type of arrangement. She's grateful, isolated from her support system, and emotionally vulnerable. The connection appears genuine from her perspective. Emma backed away from the door, on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, her mind reeling with the magnitude of the betrayal. Everything she'd thought was real, every moment of connection and growing intimacy, had been manufactured and manipulated by someone with unlimited resources and a casual disregard for her autonomy. She was nothing more than an experiment, a project, a form of entertainment for a bored billionaire who could buy anything except genuine human connection. And what Emma does with this devastating information is going to shock you, because her reaction reveals something about love and betrayal, dignity and self-respect that most people never understand until they're tested by circumstances that strip away all pretense and reveal who they really are. That night, Emma waited until she was certain Daniel would be in his usual spot among the roses, tending to his plants with the dedication that had once seemed so admirable and now felt like another layer of deception. She found him exactly where she expected, kneeling by a new planting of David Austin roses, his movements careful and precise in the lamplight that created dramatic shadows across the garden. He looked up as she approached, his face lighting up with the warm smile she'd grown to treasure, completely unaware that she knew the truth about their entire relationship. Emma, perfect timing as always. I wanted to show you the new David Austin roses that arrived today. The fragrance is absolutely incredible, and I think you'll appreciate the color variations. He stood, brushing soil from his hands with the familiar gesture she'd found so endearing, so authentic, so real. I know, Emma said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside her chest. I know about the job, the medical bills, the psychological profile, all of it. Daniel went very still, his expression shifting from joy to something that looked like panic, mixed with the guilty recognition of someone whose carefully constructed world had just collapsed. Emma, let me explain. Explain what? Emma's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm and controlled. How you've been playing some elaborate game with the poor housekeeper. How you've been manipulating my entire life, like I'm some character in your personal entertainment. How you had me psychologically profiled to determine the best way to make me fall for your act. It's not like that, Daniel said urgently, moving toward her with hands extended, as if he could somehow bridge the chasm that had opened between them. Yes, I arranged for you to work here. Yes, I've been helping with your mother's medical expenses. But Emma, everything between us has been real. My feelings for you are completely genuine. Now here's what makes Emma's response absolutely incredible, and it's going to teach you something profound about the nature of authentic love versus manufactured romance, about the difference between charity and respect, and about what happens when good intentions collide with fundamental violations of trust and autonomy. How can I believe anything you say? Emma demanded, tears streaming down her face, as years of suppressed anger and frustration finally found their target. How do I know what's real and what's just part of your elaborate psychological manipulation? Did you have Mrs. Henderson research my background so you'd know exactly what to say to make me fall for you? Did you practice our conversations, plan out which vulnerabilities to exploit? Daniel's face went pale in the lamplight, and she could see him struggling with how much truth to reveal. Emma, please. I know how this looks, but I swear to you, on everything I hold dear. You swear? Emma laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the perfumed air of the garden. On what? Your billions? Your integrity? Your respect for my autonomy and right to make my own choices? She wiped her tears angrily, refusing to let him see how deeply he'd wounded her. I actually believed that somehow, against all odds, someone like you could care about someone like me. I thought what we had was special, that we'd found something rare and beautiful, despite the differences in our worlds. We did find something real. Daniel insisted desperately, his composure cracking as he realized the magnitude of what he was losing. Emma, I've never felt this way about anyone in my entire life. Yes, I orchestrated the circumstances that brought you here, but I couldn't orchestrate the way you make me feel when we talk. The way your laugh lights up my entire world. The way you challenge me to be better than I've ever been. And what Emma realizes in this moment is going to change, not just her relationship with Daniel, but her entire understanding of trust, love, manipulation, and what it means to be truly seen and valued by another person. The saddest part, Emma said softly, her anger giving way to a deep, aching sadness that felt like grief for something beautiful that had died, is that I think you actually believe that. You've been so surrounded by artifice and manipulation for so long that you don't even recognize it in yourself anymore. You think that because your feelings are real, that somehow makes it okay that you violated every boundary, manipulated every aspect of my life, and treated me like an object to be acquired, rather than a person to be respected. She turned to walk away, but Daniel caught her arm gently, his touch sending familiar sparks through her, despite everything. Emma, please. Give me a chance to prove that what we have is real. Let me show you. Show me what? Emma pulled free from his grasp with more force than necessary. More expensive gestures. More carefully orchestrated moments designed to make me grateful and dependent. More manipulation disguised as romance. Her voice broke slightly as the full impact of the betrayal hit her. Daniel, you can't buy authenticity. You can't purchase genuine connection. And you can't manipulate someone into loving you and then claim that love is real when it's built on a foundation of lies and control. Daniel stood there in his perfect garden, surrounded by the roses he'd tended so carefully, looking more lost and broken than Emma had ever seen him. What can I do? Tell me how to fix this. How to prove to you that my feelings are genuine. You can't, Emma said simply, her voice carrying the finality of someone who had reached a decision that couldn't be unmade, because the foundation of everything between us has been built on deception and manipulation. Every conversation we've had, every moment of connection, every time I thought we were building something real together. I have to wonder what parts were genuine and what parts were you playing a role you thought I wanted to see. But here's the absolutely stunning turn this story takes, because what happens next reveals the true nature of love, forgiveness, the power of vulnerability, and second chances in a way that will leave you breathless and change how you think about redemption and the possibility of building something authentic from the ashes of betrayal. Emma packed her belongings that night with mechanical precision, folding her few possessions into the same worn suitcase she'd arrived with weeks earlier. She'd called a taxi service and arranged to stay at a modest hotel until she could figure out her next steps, her next job, her next life. But as she was loading her suitcase into the taxi at dawn, the sky painted pink and gold with the promise of a new day, she heard her name called softly from the garden. Daniel stood among his roses, still in yesterday's clothes, looking like he hadn't slept or eaten or done anything but stand there wrestling with his conscience and his heart. His hair was disheveled, his eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion and what looked like tears, and he held something in his hands that made Emma's heart skip, despite her resolve. "Emma, wait," he called, his voice hoarse with emotion and sleepless desperation. "I have something to show you, something that might help you understand." "I don't want to see anything else you've bought or arranged," Emma said firmly, though something in his tone made her pause with her hand on the taxi door handle. "I don't want more gifts or grand gestures or carefully planned demonstrations of your feelings. It has nothing to do with money," Daniel said, moving closer with steps that seemed uncertain. vulnerable, in a way she'd never seen before. It's something I wrote, something completely private that I never intended anyone else to see. He held out a leather journal, worn and obviously well used, its pages softened by years of intimate thoughts and secret confessions. I've been keeping a journal since I was 16, through college, through building the business, through every triumph and failure and lonely night. It's the only place I've ever been completely honest about my feelings, my fears, my dreams, my failures. Emma stared at the journal like it might bite her, recognizing the magnitude of what he was offering. Why would you show me something so private? Because, Daniel said quietly, his voice breaking slightly with the weight of what he was risking. It's the only way I can prove to you that what I felt, what I still feel, is real. Every word in there was written before I knew you'd ever see it, before I had any reason to lie or manipulate or present myself in any particular way. It's the truth of how you changed my life, written in real time, with no audience but myself, and no purpose but honest self-reflection. Emma's hands trembled as she took the journal, feeling the weight of years of private thoughts and intimate revelations. The leather was soft with age and handling, and she could see places where tears had stained the pages, where urgent thoughts had been scrawled in moments of crisis or revelation. This wasn't a prop or a carefully constructed piece of evidence. This was someone's soul laid bare. And what Emma reads in that journal is going to completely transform your understanding of this entire story, because the truth is more beautiful, more complex, and more heartbreaking than anyone could have imagined. With trembling hands that seemed to have a will of their own, Emma opened the journal to the first entry Daniel had marked with a small piece of ribbon. His handwriting was elegant but hurried, as if he'd been desperate to capture his thoughts before they escaped into the ether. Today I met someone who looked at me like I was just a person, she read aloud, her voice catching on the simple honesty of the words. Not Daniel Ashworth, not a billion-dollar empire walking around in human form, not a target or a prize, or a stepping stone to social advancement. Just someone kneeling in the dirt with roses, doing work he loves. I can't remember the last time I felt so normal, so seen for who I am, rather than what I represent. Her name is Emma, and she thanked me for my work, like it mattered. Like I mattered as a human being, rather than a bank account with legs. Emma looked up at Daniel, who stood watching her with naked vulnerability that made her chest tight. His usual confidence was completely gone, replaced by the kind of raw openness that comes only when someone has nothing left to lose. Keep reading, he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. The entries continued, documenting Daniel's growing feelings with an honesty that took Emma's breath away and made her question everything she thought she understood about their relationship. He wrote about looking forward to their conversations, more than billion-dollar board meetings that could reshape entire industries. He described how her laugh made him feel lighter than he had in years, how her genuine curiosity about his passion for gardening reminded him why he'd fallen in love with creating beautiful things in the first place. There were entries about lying awake at night, wondering if someone like her could ever truly care for someone like him, not because of the money, but despite it. I'm falling in love with her. One entry read, dated just a week after they'd met, and it terrifies me more than any hostile takeover or corporate crisis I've ever faced, because I know that everything about how we met is artificial. I orchestrated the circumstances, manipulated the situation, violated her autonomy in ways that would be unforgivable if she ever knew. But what I feel when we talk, when she smiles, When she looks at me like I'm worth knowing, that's real. The way she challenges me, inspires me, makes me want to be better than the calculating businessman I've become. That's authentic. I just don't know how to separate the manipulation from the genuine connection without losing both. Now here's what makes this revelation absolutely extraordinary. And it's going to change everything you thought you knew about Daniel's motivations and Emma's future. You were struggling with the same questions I am now. Emma said softly, looking up from pages filled with tortured self-reflection and genuine emotion. You weren't sure what was real either. Daniel nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears that reflected the morning light. Emma, I've done terrible things in business. I've manipulated situations and people to get what I wanted, told myself it was necessary for success, for protecting the company, for maintaining competitive advantage. But with you, I started something manipulative, and it became something I'd never experienced before. Genuine love that scared me more than any business risk I've ever faced. Then why didn't you stop? Emma asked, her voice carrying years of hurt and confusion. Why didn't you tell me the truth when you realized what was happening? Daniel ran a hand through his disheveled hair, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. Because I was terrified, he admitted. Terrified that, if you knew how we met, you'd question everything we'd built together. Terrified that you'd see me as just another rich man trying to buy affection. Terrified that I'd lose the only genuine connection I'd found in years. He looked directly into her eyes. And I was right to be terrified, wasn't I? Because that's exactly what happened. And I should question it, Emma said firmly, though her voice was gentler than it had been the night before. The foundation of our relationship was built on deception, regardless of your intentions or your feelings. You're right, Daniel agreed without hesitation. But Emma, buildings can be demolished and rebuilt on stronger foundations. We can start over, completely honest this time, and see if what we felt can grow into something even more real. Something built on truth and choice, rather than manipulation and circumstance. Emma looked down at the journal again, reading entry after entry that revealed a man wrestling with his conscience, questioning his methods, falling in love despite himself. How do I know you won't manipulate the rebuild too? How do I know this isn't just another carefully calculated move in a game I don't understand? Because, Daniel said, stepping closer with obvious trepidation, I'm giving you all the power this time. I'm putting my heart completely in your hands, with no safety net, no backup plan, no manipulation or control. If you choose to walk away, I'll respect that completely. I'll make sure you have whatever you need to start fresh somewhere else. No strings attached, no hidden agendas. Your mother's medical bills will continue to be covered through the foundation, but there will be no connection to me, no leverage, no implied obligations. He paused, his voice becoming even more intense. But Emma, if you choose to stay, to give us a real chance built on complete honesty and mutual respect, then you'll know that every moment from that point forward is genuine. Every conversation, every shared experience, every step we take together will be because we both choose it freely, with full knowledge of who we are and what we're risking. And what Emma decides in this crucial moment is going to determine not just their future together, but teach us all something profound about the nature of forgiveness, second chances, the courage required to choose love over fear, and what it truly means to build something authentic from the ruins of betrayal. Emma closed the journal and looked into Daniel's eyes, seeing not the polished billionaire or the manipulative orchestrator of elaborate schemes, but a man who had been as frightened and uncertain as she was, who had stumbled into something real and beautiful despite the artificial circumstances, who was now willing to risk everything on the possibility of authentic connection. The morning sun was rising higher, painting the garden in shades of gold and rose that made everything look like an impressionist painting. Birds were singing in the trees, and the air was filled with the fragrance of flowers that Daniel had nurtured with his own hands. Emma could see the taxi driver checking his watch, probably wondering if she was still planning to leave. "If we do this," Emma said slowly, her heart pounding with equal parts terror and hope. "If we start over, it has to be completely different. No more secrets, no more arrangements, no more managing my life from behind the scenes, like I'm a chess piece in some elaborate game." "Agreed," Daniel said immediately, his relief so obvious it was almost palpable. "Complete transparency from this moment forward. And I need to find my own place, my own job," Emma continued, thinking through the practical implications of what she was considering. "I can't be your employee if we're going to explore something personal. The power dynamic makes it impossible to know what's real and what's just Stockholm Syndrome or gratitude disguised as affection." Daniel's face fell slightly at the thought of her leaving the mansion, but he nodded without hesitation. "Of course, whatever you need to feel secure and independent." Emma smiled for the first time since discovering the truth, feeling something, like hope beginning to bloom in her chest. "But I'd like to keep helping with the gardens, if you'd want that, as an equal, as someone who's genuinely interested in what you're passionate about, not as an employee or a project." The hope that bloomed in Daniel's eyes was brighter than any sunrise Emma had ever seen, more beautiful than any of his carefully cultivated roses. "Are you saying you'll give us a chance? A real chance, built on honesty and choice?" "I'm saying," Emma replied, her heart pounding with the magnitude of what she was choosing, "that I'd like to find out who Daniel and Emma really are when they meet as equals, with no secrets between them, no hidden agendas, no manipulation or control. I want to discover if what we felt was real enough to survive the truth and grow into something even better." Daniel's smile was radiant as he stepped closer, his hand reaching out tentatively toward hers. "Hello, Emma. My name is Daniel Ashworth. I'm a businessman who spends his free time gardening because it keeps me grounded and reminds me what's truly important. I'm also completely, hopelessly in love with a woman who sees the best in people, even when they don't deserve it, who has the courage to demand honesty, even when it's painful, and who just gave me a second chance I definitely don't deserve but will spend the rest of my life trying to earn." Emma laughed, feeling lighter than she had in days, reaching out to take his offered hand. "Hello, Daniel. I'm Emma Walsh. I'm a woman who's still figuring out what she wants from life, but I'm pretty sure it includes spending time with a man who gets dirt under his fingernails, writes beautiful, honest things in a leather journal, and just learned the hardest lesson of his life about the difference between love and control." But here's what makes this story truly incredible, and why Emma's choice represents something profound about the nature of human connection and the possibility of redemption. Over the following months, as Emma established her independence and Daniel learned to build a relationship based on equality rather than control, something beautiful began to grow between them. Emma found her own apartment, a modest but charming space where she could make her own choices and build her own life. She took a job at a local florist, learning the business from the ground up and saving money toward her dream of opening her own shop. Daniel kept his promise of complete transparency, sharing not just his feelings, but his struggles, his business challenges, his family history, and the loneliness that had driven him to such desperate measures in the first place. He learned to ask rather than arrange, to invite rather than orchestrate, to respect Emma's autonomy, even when his instincts wanted to solve her problems with his resources. Their relationship rebuilt itself slowly, carefully, like a garden recovering from a harsh winter. They went on real dates, awkward and wonderful first experiences for both of them in their own ways. Daniel discovered what it was like to be nervous about whether someone would like him for himself, while Emma learned to navigate the complications of caring for someone whose life existed on such a different scale from her own. "I keep expecting you to get bored," Emma admitted one evening as they worked side by side in his garden, their hands dirty with honest soil, their conversation flowing as naturally as it had from the beginning. "To realize that someone like me can't possibly be interesting enough to hold your attention long term." Daniel looked at her with surprise and something that looked like sadness. "Emma, you're the most interesting person I've ever known. You see beauty in simple things. You find joy in everyday moments. You dream about making the world more beautiful, one flower arrangement at a time. Do you know how rare that is? How precious." 6 months after their devastating confrontation and beautiful new beginning, Daniel showed up at Emma's apartment with a proposal that took her breath away. Not a marriage proposal, though there were hints that such conversations were in their future, but a business proposal that proved he truly understood her dreams and respected her independence. "I've been thinking about your flower shop," he said, his eyes bright with excitement and nervous energy. "Not about buying it for you or financing it as some kind of gift, but about a real business partnership. I have access to the most beautiful gardens and greenhouses in the state. You have artistic vision and understanding of what people want. What if we created something together, a flower farm and design studio that specializes in locally grown, sustainably raised flowers?" Emma stared at him, seeing not a billionaire trying to solve her problems with money, but a partner offering to build something beautiful together. "You want to be my business partner. I want to be your everything," Daniel said softly. "Your partner in business, in life, in dreams, in the everyday moments and the extraordinary ones, but only if that's what you want to, only if you choose it freely." And that's how a deception that could have destroyed everything became the foundation for something more authentic and beautiful than either of them had ever dared to imagine. Their flower farm became legendary, known not just for the quality of their blooms, but for the love story behind it. The proof that sometimes the most beautiful things can grow from the most broken ground. Emma never forgot the lesson of that devastating discovery and beautiful rebuilding. She learned that love without respect is just possession, that good intentions can't justify violations of trust, and that the most beautiful relationships are built on choice rather than circumstance. Daniel learned that vulnerability is stronger than control, that authenticity is more valuable than any amount of money, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the power to walk away. Years later, as they worked together, in their thriving business, their relationship deepened by honesty and strengthened by choice. Emma would sometimes catch Daniel reading his old journal entries. "What are you thinking about?" she'd ask. And he'd smile with the contentment of someone who had almost lost everything and learned to treasure what remained. "I'm thinking about how grateful I am that you were brave enough to demand the truth," he'd say, pulling her close among the flowers they'd grown together. "And how glad I am that love turned out to be stronger than fear, for both of us." So what do you think about Emma's incredible choice to give Daniel a second chance after such a devastating betrayal? Have you ever been in a situation where someone's deception led to something unexpectedly genuine and beautiful? What do you think about the difference between love and control? between helping someone and manipulating their circumstances. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about whether you believe people can truly change, whether relationships can be rebuilt after fundamental violations of trust, and whether love can grow from initially dishonest beginnings. Do you think Emma made the right choice, or should she have walked away completely? Let me know what you think about this incredible story of second chances, the courage it takes to choose love over fear, and the beautiful possibility that sometimes our greatest mistakes can lead to our most authentic victories.